Today we're on the Caledon Trailway, which is a 39-kilometre crushed limestone trail about 50 kilometres north of Toronto in Canada. It runs from Terra Cotta in the southwest all the way up to Tottenham in the northeast. And we're going to be starting at Tottenham and going in reverse. Leaving from the South Simcoe Steam Railway, we will be following the rails of the old disused railway for a short distance. We pass the Tottenham Conservation Area and the lake on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, you have the modern buildings of Tottenham. Before we get too far along the trail, I want to tell you a story. In 2013, I was a very enthusiastic, if fairly average runner, and I entered in lots of ultramarathon races and races of other distances. And on May the 5th of that year, I was entered in a half marathon race in Toronto in Canada. About 300 meters from the end of that race, I fell flat on my face and my heart stopped beating. Fortunately for me, there were two doctors and there was a firefighter and a police officer in very close proximity in the crowd, and they rushed over to me, they turned me over and they started giving me CPR. But unfortunately they were unable to get my heart pumping again, and this went on for somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes before paramedics with a defibrillator arrived. They put the defibrillator on my chest, they gave me one shock and my heart started beating again. I was put in the back of an ambulance, taken to hospital, and 3 days later I was released. And when I got home I started running again, very, very gently at first. But I'd already planned at that point that I wanted to do something very significant with running. So on the anniversary of my cardiac arrest, I ran from Ottawa to Toronto. It took me about 8 days to cover the 470 kilometers. And although it was a great experience, it really damaged my legs, especially my shins. And from that date forward, I've not really been able to run any significant distances at all. So getting back to the trail, what you'll notice is that it's almost completely flat. So that's not very good if you're looking for a challenging route with lots of hills, but for me, it means that I can do 78 kilometers and not feel any aches and pains the next day. So it's very, very good for a beginner like myself. The reason it's so flat is that it exactly follows the route of the old railway that was built in the 1870s by the Hamilton and Northwestern Railway Company. The engineers then, they'd look for the flattest route, and if it wasn't flat, they'd build embankments or cuttings. And as you get to the road crossings, you can look left and right, and you'll see that the countryside that surrounds the trail is actually quite hilly. The railway itself was decommissioned in 1980. And then in 1989, the Canadian National Railway, who actually owned the land, sold it to the town of Caledon, and Caledon made the trailway out of the land. The first major town that we arrive at is Palgrave, and when I say major, that's pretty relative, as the population's only about 1,000 people. In the 1950s, it actually boasted as one of its residents the Canadian author Farley Mowat, who lived just outside of the town in a log cabin that he constructed, and it was there that he wrote quite a few of his early novels. So after about 20 kilometers, you arrive at the biggest town on the trail, which is the town of Caledon itself. But we're not going to stop there on the way out. That'll make an ideal spot to stop when we're returning. So I mentioned before that when I did the long run from Ottawa to Toronto, I got quite badly injured, and then for the years after that I wasn't able to run, and running had been my main source of fitness and the main way that I kept my weight down. So between about 2015 to early 2019 I put on 30 pounds, and I'd never really considered cycling, but I was desperate to find something that I could use for fitness. So I bought myself a used road bike, and from the very first pedal stroke it really captured me, and I loved every moment on the bike, whether it was on a trainer in my basement or out on the country roads or out on the trails like today. And I've started to lose the weight that I'd gained. I'm not quite there yet, but it's a long process. So I mentioned before that the trail is almost entirely flat. There is just one tiny little hill as you climb up onto the bridge that crosses over Highway 10. When you stop on top of the bridge and look south, you can see in the far distance Brampton, and then beyond that is Mississauga, and eventually if you kept going that way you'd reach Lake Ontario. And then if you travelled north up Highway 10, you'd eventually come to Owen Sound, Georgian Bay and Lake Huron. So another name that's given to Highway 10 is Hurontario Street. Heading away from Highway 10, the country roads become a lot quieter, and eventually you come to the incredibly serene Boston Mill Cemetery. The first recorded burial here was actually a Welsh pioneer called David Williams in 1823, and he met his demise when he was struck by a falling tree as he was clearing his land, and subsequently the locals buried him in a coffin that was made from the bark of that tree. So this rather busy road here is Mississauga Road. That's the first time in the whole ride that there's actually been much in the way of noise at all. Up until now it's been an incredibly tranquil, peaceful ride, a very, very quiet trail, very few people on it, which is kind of a big contrast to how it used to be. This whole area used to be a centre of industry and business. There were 3 hotels in this area. There was a saddle makers, a carriage makers, a distillery, just countless businesses. And they're all here because of what's beneath our feet, which is Medina shale, a very heavy kind of clay that's used in brick making. And that gave rise to this place here. The Caledon brickworks went into full production in 1914, and at its height it could actually produce 90,000 bricks at any one time. And the owners of the Caledon brickworks actually built houses for their workers on the site itself, and they charged them $13 a month rent, which was a lot cheaper than rents in lots of the villages around here. The production was moved to Brampton in 1958, and the kilns were actually shut down, but this site is still used by the Brampton Brick Company, who extract their clay for the bricks from here. So this fairly nondescript little area marks the far west end of the trail, or mile 0. Not mile 0 for us though, because we have to go back. That way is Brick Lane, which is a little dirt track, and it leads down to the village of Terra Cotta. And this way is the Bruce Trail, which goes all the way up towards Owen Sound and the Bruce Peninsula. But we're going that way, 39 kilometres back to Tottenham, so I better get going. So as we approach the 60-kilometre mark, we arrive back in the town of Caledon. And just off the trail there's a nice little cafe called Four Corners. So this is an ideal spot just to stop and get some refreshments before the final 20-kilometre push back towards Tottenham. So how would I rate this ride? I've broken it down into 4 categories: difficulty, traffic, condition, and the scenery. Difficulty, like I mentioned, there are no hills, so it rates really low on that. I've given it 1 star, although for me, 1 star, it being not that difficult, that's not such a bad thing. Traffic, well, the trail is only open to humans and horses. No motorized vehicles, no ATVs, so for traffic, it's perfect. The only reason it lost a star there was because when you come to the road crossings, you do have to take care. Condition, perfect. Almost perfect. 1 hole on the whole trail, which I actually managed to hit. Scenery, there's a lot of beautiful scenery to look at. The only reason why I only scored it 3 out of 5 was because you don't get the long views and the big sort of vistas. So in total, it scores 13 out of 20. And it makes for a really nice ride on a sunny day. And along the way, you also meet a few interesting characters.